Hey everybody, this is John with another installment of Think Culture, and I wanted to do kind of a quick casual chat today. I'll be back to the Sloterdijk shortly, and I'm probably even gonna hopefully finish most of it up today or whatever. But and then I might do a theory version of this casual chat also, in which I just discuss sexual difference in Lacan or something like that. Because today I'm going to talk about what we might, sort of loosely refer to as the trans movement or trans ideology or trans phenomena or something like that. And obviously, what is central here is sexual difference in Lacan's parlance, and I think that that's important. I wanted to discuss it a little bit today, but not just Lacan or anything like that. I'm also going to bring up this book. She's a Lacanian. This is an important book. I highly recommend that you read it if you're interested at all in this topic. She's a Lacanian, and she's arguing in here basically what is the traditional view in psychoanalysis, which is that transsexuality is a psychosis, right? This has always been the view. Actually, there's a kind of personal. I think this is highly important. I think it's important as a social, historical movement, that it's got tremendous importance thinking about decline and things like that, which is something, for example, that Camille Paglia says, that at the end of civilizations in the period of their decadence and decline, then you get this sort of proliferation of androgynous behaviors and identifications. You get a sort of libertinism about sex, who's having sex with who, what kind of sex they're having, etc., and so forth. So I think that she's basically right, and that this moment is critical, that it's highly important, and it needs to be thought out or thought about very deeply. But also, when I initially was going to do my thesis on transsexuality in the psychoanalytic clinic, and I eventually dropped that because I decided that there was too much heat for me. I didn't want to get kicked out of school or something. But I did a bunch of the research for it because I think that the issue is extremely important. And not only in this sort of social historical context, but I think that it's extremely important for psychoanalysis, and that what psychoanalysis is and whether or not it will continue to exist is intimately connected to this question. Because sort of, like our fundamental mythology is this Oedipal triad, for example. Or as Catherine Millet says, the structure of the unconscious comprises 4 basic signifying terms: the mother, the child, the father, and the phallus. Right? The mother lacks, and so she desires. What she desires is the phallus. That's the signifier of her desire. And somebody else has it, right, which is the father. And, obviously the child is trying to be united with the mother, like primary narcissism, things like that. He wants to be connected to the mother. Subjectivation, in this Lacanian sense, is a matter of separation and alienation from the mother. When you realize the mother has a desire that exceeds you, right? She has her eyes somewhere else. And so you want to... There's different development with males and females, sort of. But so the child wants to have whatever the mother wants, right? So he's looking at the father, who is supposed to have the phallus. The penis becomes the imaginary representation of the phallic signifier, but phallus doesn't have anything to do with penises in general. Anyway, so these are sort of the 4 basic elements, and they explain the origins of subjectivity. Subjectivity has to do with your relationship to desire, to the signifier of desire. Sexuation in Lacan is a matter of your relationship to the signifier of desire. And it is fundamentally 2. Sexual difference is between men and women, right? But we'll get to that in later stuff. But suffice it to say for now that the fundamental story in psychoanalysis is radically disrupted, subverted, demolished if you eliminate sexual difference, right? If you say there's not men, women, and children, right? Or mothers, fathers, and children. And of course there are mothers, fathers, and children. It's absurd, sort of on its face. But so I wanted to talk about, for example, to begin with, this sort of Matt Walsh question of what is a woman, which I actually knew of prior to that. Like, I'd already seen it play out politically prior to that. I don't know where Matt Walsh got it. But I once, several years ago, I think, saw an interview on the radio between some British MP and and the interviewer, and she was talking about feminism and women's rights and things like that. And someone called in, another woman, and she was saying, I'm a woman, I care about women's rights, I've always been, interested in this stuff, and I consider myself a feminist, and blah, 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 blah. But recently I've been confused with all this trans stuff, because now I'm not sure what is a woman. Who are we defending? What are we talking about? Whose rights? Right? And this MP was just totally flabbergasted, and she couldn't answer the question. Right? Eventually she has to fall back on this position. Because if you give a kind of cultural explanation, and you say, femininity, nurturing, caring, empathy, or you talk about long hair and, I don't know, makeup and whatever you want to do. If you go sort of that direction, then that's bigoted from one perspective on the left or whatever. And if you go the other direction and you talk about biology, then that's also bigoted, because women can have penises and women don't have to have long hair and be pretty, or what, they can be tough and cool or whatever. So they're in this bind and they can't answer that question. I had actually heard of that long before Matt Walsh, but I was thinking about this question, and like the answer Matt Walsh gives is biological. Basically, he says men are XY or whatever, right? Women are XX. So what is a woman? XX. And the left, I don't think that's a good answer. I don't think that the biological answer is a good one. I prefer, as you can maybe tell with what I've been talking about so far, a kind of psychoanalytic, psychogenealogical perspective on the matter. And part of that is because, like, if you think about this question, what is a woman, right? What are they both doing? They're both trying to go to the lowest possible level. What is, they're looking for the sort of lowest common denominator that's common to all individuals of the species woman, right? Of this genus woman. And that's one way of, we're supposed to be talking about essence, right? What is the essence of a woman? What does it mean to be a woman? What is the meaning of woman? And so they're both going to the lowest, they're trying to get to the lowest level, basically. And so the left, they answer, if you think you're a woman, you're a woman. It's just whatever you think, which is crazy. And we'll discuss that a little bit later in the psychoanalytic portion of this video. But suffice it to say, I think that's absolutely ludicrous. And it's, a psychotic kind of omnipotence fantasy that abolishes the real and abolishes nature, which is what their intention is, right? It's supposed to represent kind of the final victory over nature, the final victory of the plasticity of human beings, of, our ability to create of ourselves anything, of our environment anything, the total demolition of any resistance to human will or human imagination, right? That's sort of their project. And on the right, as represented by Matt Walsh, they tend to say this biological thing. And they're trying to find, like I said, what is the lowest common denominator here. And so they go to this biological thing, but it doesn't, there's a sense in which this doesn't work, right? It doesn't capture everything. If you think about it in terms of reproduction, it doesn't necessarily capture everything. But I think that we should ask ourselves whether this is the right way of thinking about essence, right? I think that's an important question to have. Should we think about essence as, because the essence of woman should be womanliness or something like that. Is there anything womanly about XX? Is there anything that we would think about in association with women, basically, or what a woman is? If we think about an ideal woman, right? If we move up, think about the end of a woman, the end of womanhood, it's telos. Or if we think about what sort of the most perfect embodiment of womanhood or womanliness, right? We're moving in the opposite direction. which is more the direction I think we should move, then I think that captures things a lot better, and it doesn't run into these problems, and it isn't rooted in this sort of scientific biologism, which in general I'm opposed to, and I think is ridiculous. So yeah, like you could ask the question, instead of going to the lowest, you could ask going to the highest, right? What is the perfection of a woman? Maybe a woman partakes in some sense in this perfection, right? And I think it should basically go without saying, right? That we all do think of women as nurturing, as more empathetic, as as maternal in some sense, as the fairer sex, whatever. The perfect woman is not me, but having XX chromosomes. The chromosomal idea here is ridiculous, and we don't. When we interact with people in the world, this is the critique from the perspective of gender versus sex, right? When we interact with people like if you say you want to have pronouns based on chromosomes, right? You can't do that. Like, you don't subject everyone that you interact with or talk about to a chromosomal analysis. You don't peek at their genitals if you want to go that direction, right? Obviously, the way that we think about men and women has nothing to do, at least, or only extremely distantly to do, with anything like genetics or genitals, right? You interact with me as though I'm a man because of the way I look, the way I talk, the way I move my body, something like that, right? So obviously we interact at the level of the symbolic, right? And this is kind of like Judith Butler's perspective on performativity, right? We're interacting with a performance, and the degree to which that performance is believable, the performance of man and woman, right? But the problem with someone like Judith Butler is that she thinks that that's all there is, it's all symbolic, it's all performance, which is nonsense, and it runs into problems. For example, what Zizek talks about, it's a known sort of criticism, and one for which there's basically no answer that she can give, which is that if subjects decide to perform man or a woman or none or neither or whatever, then the decision has to be rooted in desire. And remember, Lacan's idea of sexual difference is in turn you're subjectivated in relation to desire, the signifier of desire, right? You're subjectivated in relation to what the mother desires, right? And so that's part of why this is at a deeper level for Lacan. Lacan thinks that it's rooted in the real. Because Judith Butler, she can't answer, why am I performing man or woman? Why did I desire to perform man? Where did my desire come from? Right? If it's all purely symbolic, right? Why am I desiring one rather than the other? Why did I pick that? Where did my desire come from? Why am I oriented in the direction of the performance of man in the first place? Lacan's argument is, he thinks that it's rooted in the real. The way that he talks about the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real, I think people often are sort of confused about. So you have, like, when you have a body, right, and you start signifierizing the body, you put cuts in the real. And so it becomes an object of discourse that you can talk about and think about and things like that. So you have like head and shoulders and neck and whatever. These are all signifiers for things that are real, right? He doesn't think that you can throw any old signifier on anything, that it could be any signifier. It could be this one or that one. You can't grab a body and throw a signifier man at it and throw a signifier woman at it, and they have sort of equal validity and they're equally meaningful or whatever. That's not the way that it works. The symbolization of the thing always misses something, right? Because it's a cut in the real, right? It's a perspective on the real. It's a perspective that you made a cut so that you could have a perspective on the real, right? So the baby's body, to talk about it in sort of Butlerian terms, when the baby's born and you say it's a boy or whatever, right? You're introducing the body of the child into this symbolic order in which you have codified male, female, boy, girl, boys have penises, girls have vaginas, whatever, right? And so that's you've taken him out of the real and put him into the symbolic in some sense. Lacan's argument is that the symbolic is always missing something. It's always partial, it's always incomplete, etc. And I think that that's not debatable. That is the part that the post-structuralists and people like Judith Butler and things like that, they get correct, right? But you can't just pick any old signifier, and there is a level beneath the signifier. Everything is not purely symbolic, and for Lacan, this shows itself in terms of trauma, in terms of repression and symptoms and things like that. The real always erupts into the symbolic and disrupts it, right? So she has this picture of gender performativity, that it's all performative, it's symbolic, whatever. The fact that it runs into this paradox with respect to desire is the eruption of the real into this system of discourse, showing that it's incomplete, that it's missing something, right? When you talk about male and female in terms of biology, a biological discourse, you again run into situations in which the real erupts into this biological discourse and disorganizes it and disrupts it and things like that, right? There never will be a sort of complete symbolization, a single sort of unified discourse with no problems, no limitations, that never runs into paradox, etc. You're always going to run into paradox. You're always going to run into aporia and things like that because you're thinking at the level of the symbolic, and the symbolic is the world that we have built, from out of the real, right? We can't live fully within the real, but we know that it's there, and we can know something about it in some sense, although it resists symbolization. That's like the definition of it. But we can know something about it because of the way that it disrupts and disorganizes our sort of symbolic frameworks. And one aspect of that is sexual difference. And this is like sort of the most fundamental thing, right? I wanted to actually get into this stuff later, but what else was I going to say? I was going to say something else about Matt Walsh. I wanted to set that aside for a second. I wanted to talk about, what is essential in man and woman, and what is social construct, right? And again, social construct, that can mean in this Lacanian language something at the level of the symbolic. Everything in the symbolic in some sense is a social construct, right? This is, ultimately a Saussurean insight that the signifier and the signified, the relationship between them is arbitrary, right? We could call mothers men, and we could call fathers women. We could have a society in which some of the stuff that we associate with women or some of the stuff that we associate with men is on the reverse one, right? We could just flip-flop them, and it wouldn't make any difference at all. The question is, does that mean that... So if I can call man and women the opposite thing, does that mean that there's no man and women? Does that mean that there's no fundamental division? Right? That's sort of the question. And the answer to that is clearly no. It's clearly not the case. Again, the way that something gets symbolized, right? There is an element of artifice, of arbitrariness to that, and no amount of tinkering and figuring it out and working through it is ever going to be complete, right? That's because there is this other level. right? The left wants to deny that there's that other level, and that's why they wind up going in these two different sort of strategic directions. But the right, in my view, should fundamentally be a position of acknowledging the real, the limitations of cognition, right? We can't know everything. That's just the way it is. Everything that we think we know is limited, partial, wrong in some sense. It's just the way it is, right? The left can't handle this sort of gray zone. They can't handle ambiguity, right? They like to pretend that they can, but they can't. They're like, oh, there are cases in which you have two X chromosomes and you're a guy, you're a man, or what, maybe you're XXY or whatever. There are these anomalies. Well, there are these anomalies because the discourse is partial. But they want to say there are these anomalies, therefore let's dismiss the whole thing, right? But you can't do that. And doing that amounts to a kind of psychosis, and that's what the trans phenomena sort of represents. It's an attack on the real. They want to abolish the real of castration, right? So we can sort of connect these two things here. So we can think about the child, right? What is the situation about the child that is unalterable? Like, you could have a mother and you could have two mothers, you could have been in vitro fertilized, or, I don't know. I don't want to get into all this stupid stuff, but you could have, one parent. You could have one parent that's a dad. You could have one parent that's a mom. You could have blah, 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 blah. Who cares? And so the left looks at this situation in the present moment, and they think, you could have two moms. So let's dismiss this story about mother, father, child, or whatever. But because they think that, you can have different setups, right? You could have a mother that's really manly, and like if you have, say you have a trans mom and a trans dad, and you're raised in a polycule or whatever, like it doesn't really matter. So they think that undermines this story, but it actually doesn't undermine the story, because whatever differences exist in actually existing social arrangements or familial arrangements, and they talk about this in terms of reproduction too. There are women who can't reproduce, so you can't think about man and women in terms of reproduction, right? That's what they want to argue. You can't think about man and woman in terms of reproduction. There are men that can't reproduce. There are women that can't reproduce. Are you saying that that's not a man and that's not a woman? Blah, 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 blah. That's one perspective that you could take. Or you could take the alternative perspective and say every existing human being is the product of the combination of the maternal and the paternal function, right? Whatever the case is, as far as there are women that can't reproduce, every person living on this planet now or ever is the product of a mother that could reproduce. And our understanding of motherhood, of womanhood as womanhood as the sort of gender principle, you would say, associated with the mother, right? Though that is rooted in these sort of earliest experiences of human beings, right? So my idea of a woman is based on a woman who could reproduce. Everyone's is. Every human being now or ever in the future. Okay? We're all the combination of two different individuals who reproduced to make us. Every one of us. It's unalterable. There is no variation there. There never has been any variation there, right? So, and even if I was raised in a tribe where they don't really care about fatherhood, and so the person who impregnated my mother could have been anybody, etc. and so forth, there are still invariant kinds of experiences here. And we can think about these sort of psychogenetically, right? And to me, I think that's an important way to think about them. And we've been getting some of that in my Sloterdijk stuff too. But so, like, we know that when a baby is born, it can identify its mother's voice, right? And that seems to be significant. That seems to be an important thing. And that means that at some level, a relationship is forming between the child and the mother in the womb, right? The mother is developing, or the child is developing some idea of the mother, of the idea of the intimacy, the hominess of the mother's voice, of an attraction, therefore, to the mother. That going to the mother is a kind of return home, right? Being away from the mother is a kind of homesickness. I'm missing her voice, right? Even in terms of heart rate and things like that, the baby can identify the rhythm of the mother's heart. He's been in there, he's been listening to it, right? You can identify her voice. They've been sharing nutrition, right? I think that you should basically think about breast milk as kind of an invariant, and breastfeeding is sort of an invariant thing too. But of course, there are sort of aberrant, perverse, different societies in which you would have milkmaids and stuff like that. But importantly, every milkmaid also is capable of reproduction, right? So again, if you're thinking about this most fundamental division, there is a type of human being. This is absolutely the most fundamental way of dividing human beings. It's at the core of everything that society is, everything that we are psychologically, is all rooted in this division, right? In which there's a species of person who is like the mother that I have the earliest relationship with, right? And who I see myself as one with for good reason when I'm born, who I have this sort of primary narcissistic attachment to, right? I think that I'm the world, and the breast is mine, and breast milk is mine, and the mother's mine. Like, this is my heart rate. I'm listening to my heart rate. I'm listening to my voice, So there's a species of person that shares in this capacity for reproduction, shares in the maternal, shares in womanliness with my mother. And then there's another species of human being who erodes, who gets in the way of my attachment to her, right? That's what the function of the father, like this castrating function of the father, is in psychoanalysis. But anyway, so you have a child, you have this deep relationship from the very beginning with the mother. And then, you also get stuff like when the baby cries, the mother's breasts start to lactate. I don't know, how much you guys know about having kids or anything like that. I don't know anything about my demographic. But there's obviously a very deep reciprocal connection between the mother and child. And there's an evolutionary history to this. They've developed in this way where they're supposed to be engaged in constant reciprocal feedback, right? The child is drawn to the mother. He wants to be with that voice, etc., right? And so, like for Lacan, then you have this moment that if you never get out of that, right, you become psychotic, right? When you realize the mother is castrated, he has a kind of different conception of castration than Freud. He's talking about symbolic castration. When you realize the mother lacks and desires, and the desire goes beyond you, you don't totally fulfill that desire. You don't complete her. You don't come together and then just you're there in harmonious bliss for all time or whatever. She has something that she needs outside of you, right? And when the child realizes this, it's traumatic, right? And he wants to have it all. He wants to have the thing that enables him to be one with his mother, right? And so he starts looking elsewhere. Even if we're in this tribe and there's a bunch of men and we don't know which one's actually the father, these individuals represent possible fathers, right? They represent the father function in the sense that they disrupt the unity of the mother and the child. And so they get associated with having what the mother desires that the child doesn't, and that is what the mother lacks, right? The penis becomes an imaginary representation of that. But phallus, like they have the phallus. These guys, they have the phallus in some sense, and they're a different type of being than my mother, right? And then the child is like, okay, they have this thing, so I need to figure out how I can have it. If I can be phallic, right? If what she wants that I don't have is the phallus, and they have the phallus, then all I've got to do is get the phallus, and then boom, we're in business, we're rocking. You know? And so he's got to identify with the men in the tribe, or his actual father, or whatever. He's got a single mom, and she's a lesbian. It doesn't matter. There's something that she desires outside of her, and whatever that is, eventually the child thinks of as having the phallus and tries to identify with and imitate. You know, if it's some butch lesbian or what, you know, I don't know. At some level, this is even impossible. Like, even if you wanted to try to think about things like that, at some level, this is impossible, right? Because at some level, the child is going to, I mean, the penis and the vagina are the imaginary representations of this magical combination that creates you, right? And you could think like, you know, you could be like, okay, you can have a penis and be a woman or whatever. Why can't the child think like that? Well, it's again, you're looking at it in terms of how things are. If you look at it in terms of the, you know, psychogenetic development of every human mind in these earliest experiences, one thing that's very clear is that if you have a penis, you couldn't have been my mom. Right? There's no way of organizing society that's going to change that. That story is in the symbolic, and so if we push it to its limits, there's probably going to be a problem. You know? But do you have a better explanation? Right? That's also what has to be asked. Like, okay, even if we decided we're going to say men are XY, women are XX, and then the left points to some kind of variation in that, right? The response to that should be, okay, do you have some kind of system that better captures it, that has less errors? Right? And the answer would be no. You know, unless we think non-reproductively, we think not in terms of mothers and children and fathers, we think not in terms of the earliest childhood experiences, we think not in terms of every person came out of a womb. If we just push all this aside and pretend none of that's real, and that we can totally engineer any kind of world, any kind of experience, any kind of human being, any kind of society that we want, then we could maybe pretend that there's a better way of doing things. But however they organize it, it's going to have the same problem. The real is going to erupt into it and disrupt it at some point, right? And we, you know, if you think, like, when you start talking about an infinity of genders and things like that, that's, again, the real is kind of coming up and disrupting this discourse, in my view. Because you can't totally contain the real in language. That's just part of the nature of the world. But, like I said, the best that we can do is stuff like, every human being comes out of a mother. That mother does have to have been XX. It does have to have had a womb, right? The child forms this development with it over 9 months, or forms this relationship with it over 9 months, which is already in some sense solid, you know, when the child is born. Like, the mother-child, that relationship is already existing the moment the child is born, right? And then you have two elements, right? Remember, Catherine Millett said you have 4 basic elements of the unconscious. So you have these 2 elements, right? What happens then, right? They either, again, you have the position of psychosis in which the child doesn't differentiate itself, like the kind of deepest form of psychosis, in which the child doesn't differentiate from the mother at all, right? He never develops a self. He never achieves separation and alienation from the mother. Then you can achieve sort of the first move, but not the second. And that's like another form of psychosis. And then full subjectivity, full selfhood, normal, non-psychotic human beings, they achieve their separation and become independent, individual human beings when they realize that they're separate from the mother. There's something else. So then you get this third item. And then what's the function of the third item, right? The function of the third item is the carrier of what the mother wants, right? The mother wants something that's not the child. You have this third item. Obviously, she wants this third item to some degree. Why does she want the third item? What does the third item have that the child doesn't? That's the phallus, right? So this is the basic schema of the unconscious. And yes, this is a symbolization of the real of the unconscious, right? And therefore, it would be presumptuous and stupid to assume that this is the full case, the case forever, etc., and so forth. But it's the best we can do. It appears to be the best that we can do. And again, if we think about things in terms of, the development of a child, rather than looking out at our despicable society with all of its diversity of perversions and things like that, and then we should, if we're modeling on the first thing instead of the second thing, creating our model, then we see, there are some things that seem to be invariant, right? And we can see that those facts disrupt these other discourses, right? So they have this function of the real erupting into and disrupting other discourse. No matter how much people would like to pretend that women can have penises, no mother can have a penis, And if no mother can have a penis, if I cannot have been carried in the womb of a type of human being who has a penis, then that narrative is kaput. I'm sorry, but it is. Our understanding of the world, it evolves in this process of relationship to the mother, distinction from the mother, trying to adapt to the mother's desires, etc., and so forth, right? And that position, the position that's performing the function of a mother, has to be a carrier of whatever you want to call it, womanhood, you want to say that's something different, whatever. It doesn't matter what you call these things. It has to be a carrier of some principle that has its complement in another principle that the other type of human being has, right? This is fundamental, unalterable division. You can call it whatever you want, symbolize it however you'd like, but at base, there are two types of human beings, right? Has to be the case. I think that was more rambling than I would like it to have been. But yeah, I think we should, why don't we think about womanhood in terms of excellence, in terms of the particular excellence of women? What is the particular excellence of a woman and what is the particular excellence of a man, right? That would be talking about something that's more essential to them, right? A man achieving excellence as a man is different than a woman achieving excellence as a woman, right? And we have just as much reason, I think, to think about essence, to think about the question of what is a man and what is a woman in that way, as we do in this other way of thinking about what's the lowest common denominator. And then you wind up with something inessential, right? Womanliness has nothing to do with XX. No one thinks it does. If you say you think it does, you're lying. You don't think that it does. There's nothing about XX that seems feminine, right? But yeah, if you want to think about it in terms of activity and passivity or something like that, like you're getting, I think, more to the heart of the matter. But we should be bold in our thinking about this and not try to retreat to this. Let me find the one thing that's totally inessential and stupid and irrelevant and nobody cares about that is shared by all women and only all women. That's just not the way to think about it. Is human being, what is it, 2 pairs of 23 chromosomes or whatever? Or is a human being the political animal? Right? Are there people who are not political animals? Are there people who don't achieve language? Yeah. Are there people who don't have 2 legs? Sure. Are there people who don't have 2 arms or 2 eyes? Sure. Are there people who can't conceptualize? Sure. Should we then say that those things are inessential to what a human being is? Absolutely not. Obviously and absolutely not, right? A human being should not be defined in terms of like you take all the deficient, anything should not be defined in terms of you take all the deficient members and add up all their myriad deficiencies and then pretend that they're inessential, that those deficiencies, that their opposite is inessential. There are human beings who have no legs and no arms and can't talk and can't conceptualize. And there are human beings that are vegetables or whatever. That's just stupid. It's just stupid getting into the weeds, and it's based on this fear of the real. It's based on this idea that we can abolish the real and just have the symbolic, and then we're the masters in control of everything, right? I can organize a perfectly coherent, consistent whole universe of discourse. And therefore a whole world that has no problems, that's never disrupted, that functions and operates perfectly and smoothly all the time. That's an illusion. That's a satanic illusion. And it's just not possible. A human being is a being that dwells in language. Right? Something like that. I think that's a better way of talking about essence. But anyway, that was pretty rambly. I'm sorry. But I hope there was some stuff of interest there. And I'll probably do a video on Lacan and Catherine Millett or something. And then for a theory video, and then I'll do more Sloterdijk. And I forgot. I wanted to say that so her basic position, right, is that the transsexual, and I think she's mostly talking about or only talking about transsexual women, but it doesn't really matter. But her idea is, right, as I described this moment when the child realizes that the mother lacks and has a desire that exceeds him, right? The child looks at the mother in this situation and has to deal with that. They realize the mother is castrated, and this is traumatic. It's a traumatic revelation. And they spend their lives anxiously trying to undo it, to fit back into the mother in this perfect unity. For men, that's by what Lacan calls trying to have the penis, or have the phallus, Freudian slip. And for the woman, it's trying to be the phallus. He talks about these two things in these two different ways. But the transsexual, right, tries to deny the reality of castration and achieve the phallic mother. Right? The mother lacks the phallus. Let's say the penis is the imaginary representation of the phallus, right? So a mother with a penis, a phallic mother, that's this perfection, right? You don't have to deal with the trauma of knowing that your mother lacks, right? She can be perfect. You can embody the perfect phallic mother. You can be totally self-contained. You can be perfect, not lacking anything. Right? There's no real that can disrupt things for you. There's no real that can crash in and traumatize you, like the real of the mother's castration, right? So the transsexual is engaged in an attempt to deny the reality, or to deny the real, which is this psychotic position. One of the interesting things about this, just to quickly try to add in something else that I wanted to say, was that this discourse is all so confused and stupid. Some people, they'll say things like men and women, everyone is like confused about their gender to some extent, blah 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 blah. Yes, that's like anxiety is phallic anxiety, right? Which is to say, I wonder if I'm man enough, right? If I'm phallic enough. That's the life of a man is beset by phallic anxiety, in which he's trying to posture as having the phallus, but he's worried that he doesn't have the phallus. What exactly does the big other want? What exactly does the mother want? How can I have that? How can I show that I have that? How can I prove that I have that? Do I really have it? Do I have enough of it? Etc. and so forth. Right? That's this kind of gender anxiety. That's why as Zizek has put it, sometimes he'll walk up to a bathroom and see men on the door, a bathroom door, and see men written there, and he'll be, feel worried. He's like, is that me? Do I count? Am I a man? Am I fully a man? Do I belong in this group? Am I going to be laughed at? The imaginary representation of that could be, oh, I've got a small penis. Am I going to be laughed at for having a small penis or whatever? Right? That's one way that you can think about these things. But yeah, normal human beings with these sexual positions are anxious. They are beset by anxiety about their sexual position because they're trying to fulfill a role, right? Again, from the Butlerian perspective, you would say, where do these roles come from? She has no answer, right? But they're trying to, and the answer that she's missing is the real of sexual difference is where the roles come from. But so they're trying to fulfill these roles, and that's anxiety provoking. You're concerned that you don't really fulfill the role, right? The thing that marks out the transsexual as psychotic is precisely this issue, right? The left will say everyone, worries about it and, tries to figure out what their gender is and stuff like that. And they say that as a way of like, oh, that's just what trans people are doing the same thing. And, we're all worried about it and it's complicated and some people choose this and so whatever. But they're hitting sort of on an important area, but they're understanding it incorrectly. The transsexual does not. The thing that's weird about them is specifically that they don't have that confusion. They don't have that uncertainty. They say, I am a woman, right? And even if everyone else in the world says that I'm not, I am. I know I am. I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, which again is this kind of Cartesian perspective, and it's very essentialist, right? What is a woman? What does it mean to be a woman trapped in a man's body? What is womanhood? They don't really have an answer for it, of course, as we all know. But it's this kind of faux essentialism, right? There is something that's a woman, and damn it, I'm it. Normal sexual positions are developed and articulated intersubjectively. The trans sexual position, they have knowledge, right? They know. And it's not, if everyone disagrees with them, it doesn't matter. They know. You have to accept my version of of reality. I'm not going to accommodate myself to other people, to other people's thinking, to anything like that. That is the thing that marks out the transsexual as psychotic, or that is one aspect of something that it characterizes psychotic. They say, the walls talk. I know they talk. They're not, it would not be psychotic if they were like, that doesn't make any sense. I think it seems like they're talking, but that doesn't make any sense. Then it's like an auditory hallucination, but you're not psychotic, right? The psychotic position is the walls are talking, and if everyone's telling me otherwise, they're all lying. It's a fact. I know it for a fact. I'm not confused. I am not hearing something else and, reorganizing those sounds in my head to be like a voice. I'm very crystal clear about it, right? That's the transsexual position with regard to their sexual position, and yeah, that's the kind of logic of psychosis, right? I think there was something else I wanted to say. What else was I going to say? I said, it's the essentialism is also interesting, because the Lacanian position isn't essentialist in some sense, right? Because it's, like I said, it's intersubjective. It's about your position with respect to the mother's desire. Man isn't, tall and strong and has a penis and XY chromosomes, and and woman isn't XX chromosomes, blah blah blah. He doesn't have that kind of perspective at all. It's about the mother's desire and your relationship to it. Your relationship to the signifier of that desire, to the signifier of lack, right? And again, lack is in the real. And what that means is we can't say specifically what is lacking, right? We don't know. The phallus isn't any specific thing. It's never figured out in some sense. That's why you have this anxiety, because it doesn't exist. So his position is basically not essentialist in a way that theirs is. They're Cartesians. They have this there's a mind and a body, and my mind is female and my body is male, and we identify with the mind, obviously. Which is again these post-structuralist types that are into that are part of the transgender movement or transgender ideology. Elsewhere, they will be very concerned to deconstruct Cartesian dualism, right? Here, they're cool with it. Again, as I've said in lots of videos, it's because it's political. They don't care about the metaphysics or ontology of it. They don't care about the epistemology. They don't care about anything philosophical whatsoever. It's all political. It's just political. But anyway, that was pretty rambling. I don't know how you'll feel about that. But that's some of what I wanted to say about it. I probably forgot some things. But anyway, for now, take care. Remember, don't simply react, but think culture. I'll be back with the other videos pretty soon. So if you're upset with this one, don't worry about it. Bye-bye.